transport in the time of COVID, update 13th of July. Email me for links and slides and to give information there, and go to the Ideas with Beers home for slides and YouTube. If you really want something immediately, just email me and I'll send you the slides from today's edition. Okay, here's a little article by Carlton Reid, as usual, on how in England, wider than ever, cars are parked 23 hours a day. And this is from RAC Foundation, the shrinking space for cycling on residential roads. It's showing over 20 years how the cars have got wider. So nice little graphic there from Carlton. Right, important thing here, housing type and car dependence. This is about the percentage of residential sales by property type, looking at detached, semi-detached, terraced and flats. And you can see that when the Conservatives came in, or shortly after, well, actually really in the new builds have went up in late 90s for flats, but then the new builds went up for detached housing when the Conservatives came in. So what you're really talking about is a lot more detached housing, sometimes on greenfield sites, which tend to lock in car dependence, which we've talked about car dependence and housing types and development before. Right, these came out today. The vehicle speed compliance statistics for Great Britain for 2020. And this shows the proportion of vehicles exceeding the speed limits by road car class and type of vehicle. There you can see cars, 56% breaking the 30-mile-an-hour limit, as are vans and also motorcycles. You can't, you should see just there, 2/3 of motorbikes breaking the 30-mile-an-hour limit. On motorways, it's the majority, as it is with vans. You can see that in this graphic here. You can see where, when first lockdown happened, end of March, April, the proportions of cars breaking the speed limits went up, as did that for, that's on the 30-mile-an-hour roads, as did the motorbikes. And you can also see that on motorways, it went up a bit, not so massively, but you really see it on the 30-mile-an-hour roads. And it's all about what Ruben Smead talked about, that the increase in congestion intensity makes motorists more careful. When it goes down, they take less care and go even faster than they have been before. Been known about for about 60 years and was entirely predictable. Right, a nice little question for you. Who cycles to the jury at the Cannes Film Festival? Anybody? It's Spike Lee. And here's another of your celeb cycling ones in Copenhagen. Now, you may have seen this advert with Mads Mikkelsen. And if you go to this tweet here, you see him about to start a bit of filming, but the road is so jam-packed with cyclists that he has to wait. So do go and look at the video on that tweet. It's a lovely advert, I think, for Heineken, if I recall correctly. Just reminding you about Transport Action Network still in action at the High Court, taking the government to account over failure to consider climate change in the roads building programme. Here's the asks from Carolyn Axtell, who was on last week. Here are the links for her. She wanted to know if you were willing to be a volunteer in London to ask residents of historic LTNs whether they'd like the traffic filters removed. And they're probably going to say no. Any knowledge about petrol stations which are being repurposed for community use, Car Free Cities campaign, design your own parklet tool there, and also they're having a diverse image library, and go to the link there if you've got any photos which are relevant. Right, and this is, I mentioned this last week, but it's really important. It's about referendums and how to get low traffic neighborhoods and other forms of infrastructure and development in, from Leo Murray. Do read his thread on that. And remember those quotes from Bertolt Brecht when everybody says, oh yes, it's a good idea, but when they're possibly going to be inconvenienced, then they start raising the whatabouts. Last time to send this to the All-Party Parliamentary Cycling Group. Andy Cox's call for action this week. He talks about the game changer. Pleased to have introduced with Carl Gordon, who's the commander in the Met in London, guidance across England and Wales, read the public reporting of road crime. Game changer with benefits including increased deterrence, as drivers will know that public can report their driving offences. That will of course need a lot of publicity and resources, so we've got to keep pushing for that. This is from Bike is Best. There was a survey done by YouGov, and half the drivers questioned did not understand what this sign, which you see on the outsides of low traffic neighborhoods, means. 30% thought it meant cars and motorcycles only, despite the fact it's got a red thing around it, for goodness sake. And only 50% knew that it meant no entry for motorcycles and cars. And despite that, this is something in Carlton Reid's, the Carlton Reid noticed. They're talking about low traffic zone fines making millions. I mean, the Times really does come up with all kinds of stuff against active travel. Dreadful. Okay, on the diversity page, don't forget Women's Festival of Cycling. It's about to start. Go to the Cycling UK website. And Critical Mass was held on Sunday in central London. There's a picture of people being involved in it. Apparently they all got split up by lots of red lights. Do go and have a look at Cargo Faces Twitter thing to see a nice little video. And also there is the Black Unity bike ride. That's new. Go to that if you want to take part in it. Okay, new stuff to read. Living Streets are doing Cut the Clutter on the footway. Go there if you have issues about that. Here's the story about motorists not knowing what signage means. Whipping through this, here's some stuff about community severance. I think I mentioned that last week. Okay, in the UK, in Salford, plans for a new little store were rejected because they failed to consider pedestrians and cyclists properly. And Chris Borden said thanks to the council about that. Now, the big news today, which you're going to hear from people from West Sussex about, there's an article by Laura Laker about how the minister has written to West Sussex Council saying that they can't bid for more active travel funding just now. And the minister is Mr. Heaton Harris, saying that the schemes delivered were not allowed to be fully tested and or optimized before the schemes were removed. Not a good use of public money, and this means your authority will not be invited to bid for any new capital funding this year. You can see a copy of the letter in Laura's article. But he also notes that since be engaging on future schemes with some encouraging results, and the delivery of these schemes would put the council in a stronger position to bid for money in future years. I don't know if that means just active travel fund, and it is okay for next year, next financial, that's from next March. People have been commenting generally that it seems to be good because it's letting councils know that unless they do what they were told to do by the government, and have now been told 2 or 3 times, that they're not going to get money. And also, but other people have also mentioned that some councils have done things in a dodgy way, so it's almost like they were aiming to fail, and then because they don't really care about getting money for good stuff for active travel, which then raises the issue of how we get them to do things which they should be doing. Today, Lillian Greenwood raised this question, how many and which highway authorities were notified that they could not bid for active travel capital funding for 21 to 22 for the third tranche? I don't know if she's got an answer yet. And in London, yes, in London, we've had the Healthy Streets scorecard. Do go to the website there. It scores on outputs, sustainable mode share, active travel rate, road collision casualties, car ownership rates, and inputs, which are, have you done low traffic neighborhoods, 21-hour speed limits, controlled parking zones, physically protected cycle tracks, and brought in school streets. And they also differentiate between inner and outer London because it's easier to do a lot of those things in inner London than it is in outer London. They say top scoring councils demonstrate change is possible. Where there's a will, there's a way. While traffic schemes can be controversial, they can make a big difference to their residents. But while many boroughs are forging ahead, some are still failing to take action. Now, the issue with this scorecard, a lot of people get upset about it because they're bringing in, if you look at both outputs and inputs, you have 9 different factors, and you have to work out how to measure them and how to balance them out against each other. So some of the scores look a bit weird, but do read, do go to the scorecard, and also look at the thread here, and you can see what different boroughs have done. It's like Merton seem to have been scored well on school streets, although Lucy Dowsig says they aren't that good at enforcing them. Kensington and Chelsea seem to have scored quite well on a few things, like controlled parking zones and 20 mile an hour, which are actually quite easy for them to do. Merton seems to have scored better than Lambeth with regards to low traffic neighbourhoods, although Lambeth, you'll recall, in the heady days of last year was the first council to really get going in London and has tried very hard. A lot of the outputs like mode share are not necessarily to do with the local authority. They're due to what's happening outside the authority, and people are cycling through it on the way to work or elsewhere. They good on looking at the casualties per journey, but actually getting a good measure for that in London is a dodgy, because actually finding out the number of journeys walking or cycling in each London borough is very tricky to actually calculate. We don't really have good figures on that. Hackney's ended up with the highest pedestrian casualty rate per pedestrian trip. So I don't think that means that Hackney is necessarily being bad for walking. We could have poor measures of the amount of walking. There could be much more than has been considered. And it could be that the environment is now so much better because of low traffic neighborhoods that pedestrians are being less careful, which I see as is actually an indicator of things moving in the right direction. So a lot of ifs and buts about that, and you have to, I strongly suggest you actually read your way through all these measurements with a critical mind, and you can get to learn some things, not just if you're in London, but outside. So if all the 9 indicators are brought in together, you can see the inner London ones tend to do better because it's easier to do 20 mile an hour, easier to do various other things. Waltham Forest has come best of all the outer London. Hackney's done very well. Islington's done very well. The City has done very well. Obviously, we know about those people. Camden as well. Westminster, I don't know if they really deserve that. Southwark I'm a bit dubious about, and Tower Hamlets. Lambeth, I would have thought overall has been doing pretty well. And Kensington and Chelsea getting up there. Well, anyway, as I say, read through the whole report yourself. Yes, here's new data on cycleway 9 in Chiswick. Cycle numbers up 72%, bikes 20% of all vehicles, collisions down by half, improved air quality, very good. Look at that TfL press release, that's something that's been done well. And Ealing, the figures on pollution and low traffic neighbourhoods, which I did last week. And finally, we have on our advertisement a couple of Black and minority ethnic young people without helmets. We like adverts like that, showing people having fun, although we'd rather they weren't for EasyJet. So that's it. And now I think we're going to hear from the people from West Sussex to tell us more about what's happened there. I don't know if Mark wants to get in.
I think it's Adam that's going to talk, isn't it?
Well, I'll just give a brief introduction because it's Adam and Louise. So just very quickly, the Sussex contingent. Yes, so we knew about this letter. We knew about Roger actually got the letter, Roger Geffen, because of the court case that's going on with West Sussex. So we've known about it for maybe a couple of weeks already. And we've known that West Sussex was singled out, but we didn't know what was going on. So Lillian asked this question to try and find out, and there were various rumours flying about how many may or may not have been in there. But if you notice, the response doesn't mention West Sussex by name, it just says one council. And so that we assume is West Sussex is definitely not being invited to bid. And others may not be invited to bid depending on the quality of their bid. And as Chris Eaton Harris says, potentially no funding. So there may be more that get no funding, or there may not be, depending on whether they back up their act. But I'll pass over to Adam Bronkhorst from Shoreham Bicycle, because I know he had a meeting with officers earlier, and also Louise from Crawley, because there is a wrinkle in the letter, which again, Roger Geffen noted about mini Hollands, which may be or may not be exploitable. Adam, if you're there, wherever you are.
Okay, hello everyone. Can I be heard?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. So I've just written down a little bit of what's going on. So I'm Adam from Shoreham Bicycle, and we're a group of residents who are set up to improve and be a voice for cycling in Shoreham. So where we currently are is that West Sussex County Council were given £780,000 to embed walking and cycling as part of the Emergency Active Travel Fund in 2020. They installed 6 pop-up cycle schemes across the county in each of the districts, including one on Upper Shoreham Road, which is about 200 metres from where I'm sat. However, after 5 weeks, they decided to remove all the pop-up lanes without giving them time for people to get used to them, for them to be evaluated properly, or to improve them. The cabinet member who made the decision, we found out through a Freedom of Information request, never even visited the Shoreham lanes, or in fact visited any of the lanes in West Sussex to see them in person. West Sussex's own report stated that changes in Shoreham were the most successful in the county. They didn't increase congestion, they improved air quality, they increased cycling on the road, and that school children were using them instead of being driven to school. 5 local councillors challenged the decision because they knew it was wrong. The council's own scrutiny committee then voted for the decision to be reviewed because they also agreed it was wrong. However, the cabinet member upheld his decision, and the lanes were removed after around 100 days, with about 30,000 cycle trips having been taken place in the short time that they were there. Around the same time, West Sussex were given a further £250,000 for Tranche 2 funding by the government, to consult and design for a permanent scheme on Upper Shoreham Road with a plan to bid for funding as part of Tranche 3. We're currently in a consultation period for a good quality scheme, which has the opportunity to make a real difference and to be a flagship for the rest of the county. The first West Sussex consultation in March this year showed a 68% of respondents supported improving walking and cycling in Shoreham and on Upper Shoreham Road, which has been reflected in other results of surveys over the last few years. So there's real local support for this. We've now moved on to the first phase of design selection consultation, which finishes at the end of this month, with a view to put forward a bid to the DFT for funding to make this happen as part of Tranche 3. However, as you all know, the DFT have now said that West Sussex were wrong to remove the pop-up lanes, that they can't bid for further funding this year, and they didn't give enough time for the temporary pop-up lanes to be evaluated or to bed in, and that they wasted the public money. It seems today we found out that they are the only council that happened to. But things have changed. We've got a new cabinet member for highways, following on from May's election, who seems a lot more supportive of active travel. And there's been a real shift in the West Sussex officers' attitude and language. We're closer now than ever before to making the roads safer for active travel. And that's why it's so frustrating for the people of Shoreham, who are the ones who are really being punished by the DFT. Shoreham Bicycle, having been critical of the council in the past, we're taking the approach that the best way to make this happen is to work with West Sussex County Council and to support them. And they seem to be really valuing our input now. So please keep your fingers crossed for us in Shoreham and watch this space.
Thanks for that, Adam. Yeah, that's really interesting to get all that deep perspective on it. So really, we kind of need, well, we'd like DFT to revise that and say, actually, it's a different, playing field now, really, isn't it?
Definitely. Definitely. I spoke to the second in command, if you like, of West Sussex Highways, the officer there, and he was saying they're still going ahead to try and get a bid in and ready for the 9th of August, which is the bid date. If anything does change, they want to be in a position to go, actually, here's our bid, rather than be told, okay, look, DFT have changed their mind, you can bid. And then West Sussex to go, well, we're not quite ready. But we're the closest we've ever been. We've seen plans. The surveyors have been up and down the roads. They've spent £250,000 on the consultation and the design plans. So we're so close. So to have this taken away from us, as even West Sussex say, it doesn't really punish the council. It's the people of Shoreham who are being really affected by this. So we've been working so hard and we've had so many knockbacks that we're not used to it yet, but it's just another thing. And I keep thinking it shouldn't be this hard to make the road safer.
Well, we kind of needed an example out there, so I can see why they've done it and why the minister's done it, but maybe like it's the wrong one. Anybody else got any?
Well, Louise wanted to say something, because one of the issues is about what happens. This applies to all the two-tier authorities across the country, where you might have one of the district councils being really active and keen to do things, and the county council, as the highway authority, gets in the way and is the legal recipient of the letter. So the district councils don't get it. I can see Adrian waving from Kent, all the two-tier big shire counties are the same. And Louise, if she's there, is from Crawley Council, and wanted to say something about what Crawley are doing, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
If she's around.
I am. I'm here. I don't know if you can see me or hear me. Yeah, I just wanted to add, so I actually work for Crawley Borough Council, obviously sit underneath West Sussex County Council as the Transport Authority. So we have actually, so it's just a slightly different perspective on the effect of this on us. We'd already been working, had received across the county funding to develop our LSWIPs across the county. So we've been working in collaboration with officers at West Sussex County Council to develop our LSWIP, which is now complete. And the idea was that we were working together to put together a prioritised list for across the whole of West Sussex County Council of schemes that would be put forward for funding. Obviously first now for Tranche 3, but over the next few years. So have been working hard to actually also get some schemes put forward for this round of funding. So for us, it's a big blow that we can't try and apply. We've, as a non-transport authority, we've written our own transport strategy, which is sort of you know, and embraced the new standards. We really want to deliver something really good for Crawley, and have been, you know, working and lobbying really hard with West Sussex to actually try and make something happen. So this will set us back. If no funding is available, this will actually set us back, you know, by at least a year. We're also hoping to, we hadn't seen the letter that West Sussex had actually got, but we saw the letter that everybody else had got, seeing that there was expressions of interest for Mini Holland being invited. And we're actually still actively speaking with West Sussex about, you know, whether we can actually put an expression of interest in to develop a mini Holland scheme for Crawley, which geographically is about the same size and surface area as Kingston and Waltham Forest, you know, so actually would be ideally suited to do that. And because it's a new town based on neighbourhoods which were designed as walkable neighbourhoods but have come sort of rat runs, we actually have the sort of road structure that would lend itself to actually make that happen. So we're still working on that, still hopeful that we'll be able to do that, but we'll have to watch this space to see if the DFT will allow us to put in an expression of interest.
Yeah, well, it's that normally when they're assessing the bids, they do look for that like a political support letter. So I'd strongly recommend that the new exec member writes a nice letter to the minister saying things have changed. We've got support now. That's what I'd be asking for if I was over that end. But yeah, really good to. Adrian, did you want to come in?
Yeah, only to say the situation is exactly the same here in Kent, where we've got lots of district and borough councils eager to do this stuff, and the constraint is the county council. Not always that it's against, just sometimes can't actually process or deliver the schemes. And it's also pretty similar in East Sussex as well. So I think it's throughout the southeast.
Yeah, well, they're still in my good camp because they did actually do something, and there's many that didn't. And the area that I'm in, they were just told no chance because all the stuff was so lukewarm. So they tried it, and you know, there was a certain amount of experimentation with it as well. It was that whole you bailed out too soon, and it was looking all right. Well, there's a few that were kind of that did that approach as well. But anyway, I'll bring in Shane. Shane, did you have your hand up before we pop on?
Yeah, Brian, am I audible? Am I audible? No.
Oh yes, you are. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just a question for Andy. Like, given that the ministry is not happy with West Sussex County Council, is there merit in going to your local member of Parliament? I don't know who is it the Conservative member of Parliament, and see, can you talk to the minister directly through your member instead of relying on the relationship between West Sussex people and the department, just as a means of influence? That's what I'd be doing anyway. If you thought you had the council on board, we go around to the minister directly and see, can you get some kind of change of mood from the minister directly?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. The local MP is Tim Loughton, a Conservative MP. We've got a Conservative council here at West Sussex, and Tim Loughton is actually friends with Chris Heaton Harris. They have had a bit of a chat. He didn't know that the letter was coming beforehand. Tim is actually very supportive of a permanent cycle scheme on Upper Shoreham Road. He wanted to wait and see where people sat, and he realised that actually momentum is behind the permanent cycle scheme. So he's now supporting it and has been very good with us. The problem, I think, is coming from the DFT. I know that West Sussex haven't had a response at all to their response letter to the DFT. I know that there's the West Sussex Cycle Forum, hosted by Geff, who is very good, which is the umbrella organisation for all cycle groups in West Sussex. He wrote to Chris Heaton Harris the other week and hasn't had a response at all. So there is pressure being applied to the DFT, but it needs to come both ways, and communication needs to come both ways. So we're keeping up. I mean, I don't know what's happened. I think a lot of people are resigned to the fact that it's not going to happen this year, but we'll just have to wait and see. But it might be a case of one of those things of you don't realise what you've got until you're not allowed it. And West Sussex have, and there has been a real change of opinion and attitude from West Sussex. So I think, as Adrian even said, I know Adrian gave a fantastic talk to Greening Stenning about 20 miles an hour, and he's very good as well. But I think there's definitely been a change of attitude from West Sussex, which is incredibly encouraging. And I know that they're very frustrated that this has happened, and they want something to happen, and it's in their local LC whips. It's mentioned in their local transport plan and lots of other things, but they're still asking the public, do you want it? Which frustrates me no end. But yeah, the local MP is on board and has had communications, but it seems to be one way.
Well, there's still going to be money in a year's time, and if they could keep developing it and using some of their own funds and showing willing and maybe getting a bit of match, could well, you know, work out about the same time that you would have been delivering it permanently. But like, yeah, I still think like it's that political support thing that went wrong, you know, and that's fixable with a conversation like you're talking about, really, isn't it? Getting the ministers to bang heads. Interesting stuff. All right, should we move on to the next few speakers? Probably on a similar theme now. I'm just going to ask Charles, because Charles, you did a trip to Paris and you're going to tell us about it. That sounds good. That's a terrible segue, but yeah, what can we do?
Can you see that, everyone?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I know this, Robert always refers to not talking about anything outside the UK as much as possible, but I thought people might be interested in just what I recently experienced in Paris, especially as it's like, a bit like the sort of the twin to London in many things. So we're not talking about Copenhagen and Amsterdam. From what I've read in social media, a lot of talk about Hidalgo being a great mayor, 600 kilometers of cycleway. And I'm sure some of you in the group know more about the facts and figures than I do, but I just thought I'd share this 24-hour experience I had a couple of days ago. The map there of Paris shows the 2 cycle trips myself and my wife did. It was promoting my revolutionary new urban bike, but that's another story. Starting point was outside the peripherique, bottom there in the picture, and that itself deserves some explanation. We wanted to go to Paris by train, but on the TGV we had to dismantle the bikes, and there was quite a lot of faff involved and cost, and it actually turned out cheaper to get an Airbnb just outside the center of Paris and cycle in. Another crucial point, and you could say this is a negative, was that little part of Paris had free car parking, so we could drive up, take the bikes out of the car and cycle in. The first sort of experience, I mean, just, whoops, sorry, just try and get that. Is that working? Have we got another picky? It was very variable what we came across in terms, and I don't know if this is all the 600 kilometers that I've read that the mayors sort of created, but the general impression was it was very variable. We had sort of quite good cycleways like these pictures show, the one on the left with the bus. There was nothing of the standard I've seen. There don't seem to be any Brian Degans in Paris. There was nothing really structured that we came across. A lot of paint. The one on the left, it says bus and cycle. Unfortunately, taxis were also allowed there, and there's definitely a conflict between taxis and bikes. The one in the middle, a lot of this mixed paint. I don't know how much is due to the COVID the COVID lockdown, and some sort of cursory bollards there, which gave you some degree of safety. And the one on the right, you'd get this variability where the one on the right's a 2-way cycle lane, but you would only know that just by the paint. And as you can see, it was fading. A couple of other areas a little bit more secure. The 2 on the left were clearly sort of separated from the roads, and the one on the right there was wide, if not sort of hard separated. What we did come across, and I have to say that I'm not a hipster cyclist, but I'm a confident cyclist, but my wife is a good example of cyclists which just need to be a bit safer. You know, they can bicycle, but they're easily put off if the structure's not there. And these were just terrible. The one-way cycle routes. So if everyone is thinking of the 600 kilometers that the Mayor Hill Darga has put down, if 10, 20, 30% of these, then really they don't need recognizing, because quite frankly they're terrifying for anyone who's not a confident cyclist. We've got a one-way street, and they've just managed to squeeze in a bit of paint and sometimes some studs on the road to say that the cyclists can go counter to that. But as you can see in the top middle photograph, you need to have a bit of a nerve to come head on to that car. So to the professional bunch in the group, that's probably just a non-starter, but certainly our experience was that was quite alarming and didn't make it inducive to cycle in Paris. Just a quick touch of the bike share. The left is the Smooth and Go bike share, which took over from JC Dassault some years ago. My impression, and again, I don't have the stats, but my impression is that this is better used than the London bike share. The last I looked about a year ago, they were getting figures of sort of 8 to 10 rides a day per bike, which is up to the sort of Barcelona figures of several years ago. So that was well used. The bicycle on the right, it says pony bike, but actually it's an electric bike made by Zoov, which have teamed up with the company on the left. And so you might see some more sort of changes in the future as those two products combine. What was really alarming was the amount of traffic still in Paris. I don't know if they have a congestion charge, but the impression was my impression was there were more bikes than I've seen in London, and that might be completely incorrect. But there was not more bikes at the expense of less traffic. And again, the impression there was the traffic was worse than London. When I've been to London, I've just seen white vans, taxis, and very rich people driving around the centre of London. Here, they just look ordinary Joe Blogg driving around. So I'm not quite sure what there is there to discourage cars, but they've got a job on their hands, Paris, to deal with the traffic. It's still really bad. There were some of these sort of ambiguous areas. As you get in the continent, these huge pavements, road spaces, squares. The one at the bottom, you can see Place de la Concorde, a whole pile of traffic on the left, totally quiet on the right. There's bits and bobs of paint to sort of steer cyclists around, but because it's quiet, you can just see they're just going straight across the open space. I suppose I don't know if this is the flagship or not, but I've seen it in social media, the Rue de Rivoli, where clearly they've done a really good job just completely banning certainly all cars other than taxis and buses. And there you have a full two-way segregated cycle lane, albeit not segregated with structure, alongside a bus and taxi lane. But it's, you know, the Rue de Rivoli is about 1 kilometre long, and if that's the flagship of Paris, don't think the rest of Paris is like that. And even at the bottom there, the photograph coming onto the Rue de Rivoli, a lot of mixed messages for cyclists, crossing the taxi bus lane. I don't quite know what that means, the white double arrow with the cyclists and the yellow, totally confusing. So you have to sort of use your wits to get yourself around. A lot of scooters. If you look at the top right, you'll see a scooter there. A lot of scooters. I haven't quite seen so many scooters in the city. But so at the end of the day, I would say more bikes. More bikes, more bike share use is a positive for Paris. And my feeling was a negative is more traffic. They've still got a battle on their hands there. But that's just sort of the last two photos. Paris, great city, can't knock it.
Thanks, Charles. That was really good. So a bit comme ci, comme ça, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Not quite as genial, yeah. Yeah, well, what I like about what they're doing in Paris, because like it's one of those cities, it is like the tale of two cities with London, isn't it? Very similar. And it got itself into a complete almighty mess. And we're going there about 15 years ago. At its peak worst moment, I like to think. Just then, it was just unbelievable. You get out there and there's just 6 lanes of traffic, and it's just carnage everywhere. You go, oh, what has happened to Paris? But they're doing something about it, a little bit like London is. And so, well, one, it's having that vision to do amazing things, and I think they've got that now with the man. But then there's the reality of it. London's still in this. They're both really started cities to put it into the kind of European language, and only Mark Struggle will get that reference. But both still starting. They've got that big vision of the kind of building from there. But neither London nor Paris are really climbing yet. They've still got a hell of a lot to do. So,
I just would like to add that my experience of the other sort of regional cities of France is they're way ahead of England. There's a general sort of sense that the communities, the driving communities got on board to the message of active travel. So it very much stuck out as a problem, Paris, from the other cities I've been in across France. So
I always used to say the line that a beep in France means, hey, well done, you're cycling your bike, not get out of my way. And it's like they've got a few cultural like head starts as well, haven't they? But that's really interesting. Anybody got any questions on Charles' trip, or should we move on to the main talk? Yeah, let's move on. Oh, go on, Mark. I've got to ask Mark. I can see his hand up.
So in regional cities in France, well, the rule in France says that as a pedestrian, this is a pedestrian question rather than a cycling question. The rule says that you are supposed to stop as a driver for a pedestrian that appears to be wanting to cross the road. And in regional cities, that happens. If you're on a zebra, next to a zebra crossing, and you look like you're going to stop, the cars stop, and then they get very cross when you don't. And I'm wondered whether that's the case in Paris, being a capital city, whether people are just generally more impatient and just horribler than in the regional cities. Because I haven't been to Paris for years. So my experience in smaller towns is it works. Does it work in Paris for walking?
No, I mean, you're right, Mark. I got the feeling there's almost a churlishness in the drivers of Paris. They're almost still being like boy racers, going up to sort of 50 miles an hour in between 2 red lights. So I believe in the logique français. I think it'll get through to the Parisians, because they're my general feeling is they're on it, the French. But I do see that on it in the regional towns. There is this, just as you said, this respect, this sort of recognition. Whereas my feeling in Paris is they're still like boys with their toys, and they don't want them taken away, which is slightly different from my feeling about London. Sort of.
It's interesting. Like, so last time I was in Paris a couple of years ago, I went for a big walk with Peter Murray, looking at architecture like you do. And I found the drivers to be quite amazing. And it was really like a crystallizing point of we need side road zebras, just to go back on that, because it's always on my mind. But I did find cars waiting in the middle of junctions to turn right and letting you cross. And I even then spent a couple of hours getting data on like the willingness of drivers to yield and like the delay at junctions, and use that to compare it to London and Manchester. And Paris was absolutely nailing it in terms of reduced delay and like the ability of drivers to give way. So just a shout out to our French cousins there. Even though Paris, I agree, is like it's worse than some of the other places I've been to, like Nantes and Lyon and all the rest of it. Saying their names terribly, but I still thought it was like, oh yeah, I need this behaviour in London. I was thinking to myself, and on one of the cases I was trying to make to DFT, I said, I'll pay for you, jump on the Eurostar, we'll just walk around Paris for 2 hours and tell me you don't want side road zebras at the end of it. They're like, that's Paris, this is the UK. I'm like, yeah, well, it's easier for me to take you from London to Paris than it is up to Manchester. Come on. Anyway,
yeah. Well, like I said earlier, Brian, there was no evidence of your great works around there, and I think it's just to counter the story that when you see in the press, everyone's waxing lyrical about the Mayor Hidalgo, and our Airbnb host said she's spent far too much money and it's highly inconsistent what she's done. So these were locals saying it's not a bad thing, but it's not all the glory that maybe the sort of external media might paint it out to be.
Well, I'm open to offer from Paris anyway. I'm going Hartley at the moment. It's been a tough week. No, good on. Well, yeah, spending and doing things, you're always going to get criticism. That's fine. But you'd rather be criticised for not doing it well enough than for doing nothing. So, and I think you've still got a quick plan. Anyway, we'll finish up here. But cheers, Charles. That's really good feedback, and it's nice to hear from somebody who actually got out of the country and saw something. So, well done for that as well. All right, we'll move on to our two main speakers now. I'm not sure what order they're going to do or exactly what they're going to do, but it's going to be good anyway. So Simon Munk and Roger Geffen, what have you got planned for us?
Well, Roger's going first, but seeing as he didn't unmute quick enough, I'll jump straight in and just say, I think after the kind of Shoreham, West Sussex debacle today, I think, we've been talking about for a while, just talking about political will and how to get it, what it looks like, what happens when you don't have it, what happens when you do have it. But I think over to Roger for starters to talk about the national picture.
Right. Okay. Well, yes, Brian, you're not the only person who doesn't know quite what's going to happen. We only kind of agreed to do this a little earlier today, so let's go for it. And I had no idea, and even when I did agree to it, I didn't know how much discussion there would already be of the West Sussex decision. The West Sussex situation is clearly hugely relevant to any discussion of political will. I think I was going to open up by saying, I'm sure none of you need reminding that LTN 120 is out there now. It's a very good document. It's not perfect. It'll be possible to improve it still further once the government's proposed highway code changes have gone through, and I'm very optimistic that they will be going through, that a new highway code is expected to be tabled before Parliament in early autumn. It should hopefully become a sort of effectively a legal code by late autumn. And then it'll be possible to go around the sort of Forth Bridge repainting task of saying, well, what is it that we wanted in LTN 120 that wasn't possible before the highway code? There are various forms of continental style junction design that Brian and others have been sort of working excellent compromises for how to get around the fact that we can't do various things because the highway code wouldn't necessarily back you up, and hopefully by November or so it will back us up, and then we can write a few more things into into the next revision of LTN 121 or whatever year it will be by the time we finally get there. But in the meantime, LTN 120 is pretty good, and as we've heard earlier this evening, the FT is absolutely serious when it said in gear change and in LTN 120 itself that it will withhold funding from local authorities who don't adhere to it. And not just cycling walking funding. They have said that local authorities who don't follow that guidance are potentially putting their wider transport budgets at risk. So I think, with absolute respect to everything that Adam was saying about how and others have been saying about how the punishment falls on the local community, it does create a dilemma for us, for us as a national organisation. We do need to see the likes of West Sussex put in the sin bin for a while, but I have said this to the DFT officials, we need them to be seen to be in the sin bin for a while, and we also need to see them being given a route out of the sin bin, in which they're effectively being told, right, you must swear in whatever, never ever to do anything ridiculous like that again, to be absolutely 100% absolutely compliant with LTN 120 forever in future. And it's important that local campaigners elsewhere in the country are able to hold up what happened to West Sussex as an example. So we at the risk of recognising the pain that will be felt, by local campaigners and by district councils in West Sussex, everyone else around the country needs to hold up what has happened to West Sussex as a case of don't to your local authority, don't make the same mistakes that West Sussex did. So I think that this is an important moment, and at the same time, I think we also need to make sure that West Sussex does have a route out of the sin bin. Let's bear in mind that this tranche 3 active travel fund is already running late in the financial year, so the next tranche will not be waiting. West Sussex won't be waiting for a year, more like 9 months. And I have suggested to DFT that there is a possible earlier route out of the sin bin, in that, frankly, other local authorities are likely to end up not spending their money. So there is likely to be some underspend. And if West Sussex carry on doing what they are doing, namely keep preparing the scheme despite having been told they can't bid right now, there is a possible opportunity for them to sweep up some year-end underspends. In other words, not have to wait for another bidding round, and then they get let out of the sin bin. But as I say, on condition that they promise never, ever, ever, ever to do anything like this again. And I think that's the right. I think DfT in that respect, I think, is taking the right approach. And I hope local campaigners and local, indeed district authorities in West Sussex can accept that that's the right way to view this. Anyway, so I think the point about local political will, I think the West Sussex scenario will help you as local campaigners around the rest of the country to strengthen political will. Now, what else is DfT doing besides putting West Sussex in the sin bin to strengthen political will? Well, of course, the big question is, when is it going to set up Active Travel England? Because Active Travel England will then, once it's in place, will start doing what has just happened to West Sussex, threatening to withhold funding from giving funding those who comply, threatening to withholding from those who don't, whilst at the same time supporting local authorities who lack the ability to comply for lack of capacity, lack of financial strength, all of that stuff, to improve. And that is also really important, because otherwise the money will go to the strong, the lack of funding the punishment will end up on the weak, and the weak will get weaker and the strong will get stronger, and nothing can change. So it's really important that Active Travel England starts taking on this role of levelling up between the authorities that can and the local authorities that can't or won't, and shifting them, the latter, into authorities that can and will. So yeah, Active Travel England will play a part in this, and it's important that you as local campaigners around the rest of the country are talking to local authorities about getting ready for that process, because they don't want to fall on the wrong side of it. Mark Strong saying improve the money going to the strong. Right. Anyone here called weak? Right. What else? Well, the other thing that's going on is that the local authorities who didn't get the West Sussex letter have been asked to put in submissions for Active Travel for ATF funding tranche 3 as quickly as the 9th, if I remember right, of August. Now, the reason that is happening is because Andrew Gilligan, as Boris's special transport advisor, sitting in number 10, wanting to see good, strong funding for cycling walking, needs to be able to prove to the Treasury that local authorities have the capacity to spend at least the 2 billion we've got, and preferably more than that. At the moment, there is a real risk. I mean, the Treasury is saying, go on, provide the evidence that they can spend even 2 billion, let alone more than that. And at the moment, Andrew Gilligan hasn't got that evidence that they can spend the money. Obviously, we want to believe that local authorities can spend the money, but the evidence so far is lacking. And things like West Sussex don't help with providing the evidence that local authorities can and will spend at least 2 billion, if not more. I don't know, to Mark's question, we don't know who the other councils are who were warned that they might not get funding if they don't submit good bids. We can take guesses, but we don't know. Yes, it's about time we submitted, having done a parliamentary question, it's now time for a Freedom of Information Act request to find the letters that were sent to all the different authorities. That's the next step. So political will, yeah, getting local authorities ready to what's going to happen is local authorities are going to end up submitting, a lot of local authorities are going to end up submitting not great LSWIPs. And as local campaigners, it requires all of us to seize the opportunity of the government's forthcoming announcement on an e-bike support scheme to say to local authorities in Shire County areas that if you thought that cycling was basically an urban thing, think again. This is, and we need, one of the things that's going on is a revision to the LSWIP guidance. Now, this too is a really important opportunity, and we, Cycling UK, Sustrans, Living Streets, will be feeding into that revision of the LSWIP guidance as part of our role in the LSWIP support project, which is DFT funded. So some of the things we'll be saying about the revision to the LSWIP guidance is firstly, it needs to take greater account of, as it were, equity. Who do we want to be cycling? Because at present, most LSWIP networks are prioritising, perfectly understandably, the easy wins. That was the perfectly sensible thing for local authorities to do at the start of the LSWIP process when we hadn't even got 2 billion. We'd got diddly squat at that time. So they needed to prioritise the things that were most likely to, you know, if they got a very small amount of money, where could they spend it in ways that would show demonstrable results? And frankly, that was going to be the sort of commuter routes in the connected sort of relatively affluent middle class areas to the city centres. Not good at all for increasing the equity of who's cycling, for catering for children's trips, women's trips that are more made by women in our current gendered society. Let's put it that way. So shopping trips, school escort trips. They're not the radial trips that our current LSWIP network are prioritising. You end up with very different networks when you start thinking about a more diverse cycling population. And when you start spreading from cities to towns, you also start thinking about a network that extends outside the town. After all, in a town below a certain size, the cars that are driving in that town will mostly have come from outside that town. That is not the same, that's not true of a city. In a smaller town, the barrier to getting people out of cars is much more likely to be the 60 mph single carriageway that connects that small town with its outlying villages, or the next door small town kind of 3 to 6 miles away. And therefore, a more rural LSWIP is much more about the connections between towns and their neighbouring villages, rather than the streets within the town. In other words, it's very different from a city LSWIP. And none of that is in the current LSWIP guidance. Now, the opportunity to explain all that to Shire County councillors and officers, we're going to get a fantastic opportunity when the DFT starts funding e-bikes. As I say, the opportunity to say, right, okay, now start planning your LSWIPs around the idea that people in villages, older people, more women will start cycling, and for longer distance journeys. That allows local authorities to start planning much more ambitious, more geographically wide-ranging LSWIPs that also meet a wider range of journey types. So do seize that opportunity. I think that's probably the biggie going. And in that way, you are helping the local authority to put in an ambitious funding bid, which in turn helps Andrew Gilligan to convince the Treasury that the local authorities do in fact have the plans to spend the money. So in other words, you're not just helping your local authority, but you're helping us as a national cycle advocacy body, and you're helping Andrew Gilligan to do his job from within number 10. So this really is a moment for us all to pull together and seize that political opportunity. I hope that sort of sets the tone for what is the current political context that we're all operating in. Okay, over to you, Simon. Do you want to take it on from there?
Yeah, happily. So I think that really does set the national context beautifully, and I think the Shoreham situation, West Sussex situation, that there is teeth here as well. So, and I think, one of the things I was thinking about this, about political will, for those who don't know me, I'm a senior infrastructure campaigner at London Cycling Campaign. Probably nearly everything I do has nothing to do with infrastructure these days, everything to do with generating it, marshalling it, keeping it going, helping sure it's there. And one of the things I was thinking about with the Shoreham case today, and I was on Twitter talking about this, is, and I think Brian covered this brilliantly earlier, is why not show willing now? So with all this stuff coming online, with rural LSWIPs as an opportunity, with real-teacher schemes and funding, there is a real opportunity for councils to actually spend a little bit, a tiny bit of money now, of their own money. we're starting to see that in London. We're starting to see boroughs which have been punished for being poor in the past, for being, and I don't mean monetarily poor, I mean that they've not done good schemes, have spent their own money, you know, whether that's designing strategies, whether that's starting to design up schemes, whether that is starting to do some quick wins on the ground. And I think that there can't be more strong a signal, you know, that you're ready to spend money, you're ready to spend money from the DfT, you know, or from TfL, then you're actually spending a bit of your own money. This idea, you know, and I've seen it in the chat, that the councils are completely Boracic and they've got nothing left, is just simply demonstrably not true. You know, boroughs still have money. It's where they choose to put it. From me, from inside London, one of the most key things I saw during the crisis was that Lambeth Council, one of the big political will boroughs in London, really forging ahead. Lambeth turned around very early on in the crisis and said, you know what, the car volumes are lower. We're not going to need to spend as much on potholes this year. So we'll just divert the pothole fund for a year straight into active travel. And that got them some money when before anyone else was proposing funding, before all this stuff was happening. So there is a real opportunity to say, you know what, we are here as a borough, we've got political will, if you're willing to put a bit of cash up. The other thing, you know, how when I assess a borough on political will, how do I know when a borough is actually showing political will? And you know, this is deeds not words area. You know, it's so easy to get caught up in, and I really hope West Sussex has turned a corner, but has it turned a corner? Are those councillors just smarting from the you know, the loss of money, the loss of funding, or are they actually now regretting stuff, moving forward, changing it? And I think deeds not words has to be really, really key to this. You know, but you know, do you talk to councillors on their mobile? Are you on WhatsApp with councillors? Are you know, seeing schemes before they are finished? You know, so often when I started campaigning, we would get handed a scheme, you know, and told, right, we're going out to consultation with that next week. And we'd say, well, what about that massive hook risk on the junction? And everyone would go, well, too late now, you know, it's going out. That's how it's going out. So are you seeing schemes early? You know, are you treated as a critical and friendly expert? Have you ever had a pint with a councillor down the pub, you know, or a coffee in a coffee shop? You know, these things aren't, you know, these things aren't the deeds as it were, but they're the start of the deeds. One of the big ones I keep coming up with is do your councillors actually get out and champion schemes? One of the things that I think certainly in London, you know, I see over and over again is the boroughs that have weaker political will are the boroughs where they put out a consultation that basically says, do you like this thing, yes or no? And it kind of has a very factual explanation of what they're proposing to do, but at no point do they really explain why they're going to do something, why it's really important. And at no point is the lead councillor on Twitter saying, this is a brilliant scheme and we really hope residents get behind it. Instead, it's like, we will listen to residents and whatever they say, you know, goes. So there is a really clear set of delineators between those boroughs that are doing stuff and are going to do stuff and have a track record of doing stuff. And I think this year in London, the other thing I'd point out that's really clear from my point of view is there are boroughs in London who were not doing stuff before. So in 1 year, we've seen Islington go from a standing start, having done nothing for decades, to doing like many LTNs and cycle tracks all at once. Lambeth were revving up to do stuff before the crisis, but really hit their stride during the crisis. But there are other boroughs who have started delivering, you know, through the crisis, partly because of the funding situation and the opportunity to grab money crisis. But down and going, you know what, it's time. So I think that covers looks like. If Roger's to add on, if he hasn't, I will jump straight on to how to keep it. Yep, looks like I'm going. So very simply, to get political will. One of the things that I did way back in Waltham Forest, I can't be on a call without mentioning Waltham Forest Mini Holland, was doing one-on-one rides. You know, that really helped councillors see the scale of the issue, you know, close up. If they won't do a one-on-one ride, Why won't they? Is it because they're scared of their own roads? You know, I think, you know, another issue, one of the issues we're looking at with Waltham Forest, sorry, well, not with Waltham Forest, with London now, is climate emergency declarations. You know, we have, what, 10 years to really crack this one. You know, Shoreham are at a massive, you know, West Sussex, massive disadvantage, being 1 year behind. Although there are many, many other councils who will do nothing for the next year, you know, but we cannot afford to have any council in the whole of England, in the whole of the UK and the whole world do nothing for a year. We can't afford that now. You know, the scale of progress and change needed is so dramatic. So if a council has declared a climate emergency, hold them to it really strongly. That is what we are going to do in London now for the campaign for the next year and a bit in the run up to local council elections. You declare a climate emergency, why aren't you acting like it's an emergency? And then I was going to very quickly jump into very quickly. I had a little bit on bumps and wobbles. So one of the things that I probably haven't talked about very much ever in public is how wobbly some of the councillors in Waltham Forest have been over the years. So we won the bid in 2013. We started delivering in 2014. We faced an almighty wall of opposition in 2015, and councillors all over the place, wobbling later. Clive Lokes, you know, has been absolutely stalwart, but he is not for the entire council. And there has been a real issue with people at times feeling the weight of opposition. So I think there is a real skill and art to knowing when positive with councillors and when to raise them up and when to push and when to help and when to lift the weight and when to say, you know what, we're here with you, we're here. And I think, you know, given some of the call, I'm going to say it's nearly always the time to be. It's very rarely the time to be negative. You know, you should level your negativity 5% positivity, you know, if you possibly can. And wobbles, you know when to do stuff behind the scenes. You know, so much of my work now for LT, people never hear about. They'll never hear about. You know when to go behind the scenes, when to go public, learn how to do that. And I guess the final thing on this is learn very early on, do your research on councillors. Councillors are very badly paid generally. They don't get into this game for money. They get into the game for some reason. Could be adulation, could be prizes, could be, you know, the glow of resident approval, could be social justice, could be, you know, all the things, ideology. Learn to understand your individual councillors. Don't make the mistake of assuming that what they say as well on social media is the same as what they actually care about. One of the most classic interactions I've ever had, this was in London, was the cabinet leader who just seemed to care about nothing but social justice. It was all about social justice on their feet all the time. We tried, you know, putting out loads of information about how cycling is a social justice tool, land at all, but when we started doing press releases that landed in the local paper, immediately we got shifts every single time. So that councillor might have talked about social justice, but again, deeds not words. Their deeds were about PR. So very quickly, before I hand back to Roger for anything else, coalitions. One of the things, I don't know if Claire is still on this call, but Claire Rogers has been doing amazing work with the LCC, is on building coalitions. You know, we're now not just cycling, we're cycling and walking, we're cycling and walking in climate, we're cycling and walking in climate and pollution, we're cycling and walking in climate and pollution and health, we're cycling and walking in climate and pollution and health and kids, etc., etc., etc. So Better Streets, you know, groups which Claire is mentoring, that has been an amazing experience for LCC in terms of just taking some of the toxicity out of cycling, you know, and have you, and to broaden out the base. But there are loads of coalitions forming out there, and I think that's a really powerful time. It's a really powerful thing. Finally, my final point, and back to Roger, real world. As much as possible, do not make the mistake of thinking that social media is in any way reflective of the real world. Over and over again, realise is when I go door to door and when I talk to people in the street, their opinions is vastly different from the sound of stuff on Twitter. So if you engage people on Twitter, you get barracked and bombasted and blasted all the time. When you go to the doorstep, quite often it's kind of benign nonchalance about stuff. And I learned this the day the first LTN went in Waltham Forest. The aunties in the first LTN were so angry about it, they went door to door in the second LTN. We went door to door. And what happened was the second LTN folks, because they engaged with, because they felt really good about the scheme, they were just like, to the aunties, they were like, we don't, you know, this looks good. We don't care about what you're saying. If you, it was just all towards negativity. So get out there as much as you can and do stuff face to face, face to face, on Zoom with officers, you know, whatever, on mobiles, door to door, get in people's faces, because you can have so much a better experience. If you spend 90% of your time on Twitter and 10% of the time, you know, door to door, or swap it if you can. Roger.
Great, thanks, Simon. All I'm just going to say, firstly, don't not only caution against believing what you read on social media as a measure of public opinion, but the mainstream media is also a pretty bad barometer of public opinion. You know, if you're reading what, you know, the Daily Telegraph and the Daily Mail were saying about low traffic neighbourhoods and all the rest of it, as if that were public opinion. No, they are not public opinion. They are trying to manufacture public opinion rather than reflecting it. And this is very similar to what those same papers were doing 15 years ago with speed cameras and 20 mph. If you read those papers at the time, you would have thought that everybody hated speed cameras and everybody hated 20 mph schemes, when in fact polling evidence showed that about 75% supported them, including 72% of drivers. It's not as if drivers are a different breed and have different attitudes. There's widespread support for this stuff, and the same is true for the low traffic neighbourhoods and all the rest of it. And you just need to reassure the councillors that what they're reading in the papers about, you know, outcries against these things, don't believe it. It's just not. It's just a paper trying to sell stories. So that's one thing to remind your councillors just when they're having those little wobbles that Simon rightly talked about. The second thing is, I did, you know, some years ago, I did a sort of effectively a kind of, we did a roadshow and we were running the Space for Cycling campaign alongside London Cycling Campaign. We did a Space for Cycling roadshow, and one of the things I did was a unit in, and the slides are still available online, and maybe I should bring them around. Understanding your local authority, understanding and influencing your local authority, and the message in a nutshell of that is there is no one size fits all answer to how to understand or influence your local authority. You need to understand first of all, and I suspect everyone here probably does know, the difference between the highway authority and the planning authority, or whether in fact your authority is a unitary authority that does both. If you don't, then you need to find out and understand the distinctions between those things. You also need to think about political control. Is it a one-party state? Is the county council on the same political colour as the planning authority? Is it the same colour as the local MP, or are they at war with one another? And is your local authority basically a councillor-led authority or an officer-led authority? They do vary. You know, as a general rule, a local authority that is fairly kind of politically balanced, you know, flip-flops from one to the other, or spends a fair bit of time in no overall control, it's much more likely to be run by the officers. But even that is not a general rule. So understanding who really makes the decision, is it the councillors or the officers, is quite an important thing. And you won't find that in any document on the council's website. So all of that stuff. There's also just understanding the structure of the local authority. Again, there is no one size fits rule as to, you know, where would you find, is there a person called a cycling officer? Are they an engineer? Are they a planner? Are they also doing walking? You know, who do they also deal with rights of way, or is rights of way in another government department, other department of the local authority? All these things are just things that for which there are no one size fits all things. All I was presenting in that little module was a set of questions you can ask in order to understand your local authority, rather than here's the one size fits all answer. So it's possibly worth unearthing that. Another thing I was going to say, in the context of that revision to the LSWIP guidance, I mentioned how we're going to be pushing for it to say things about equity and more equitable the journey planning, how we're going to be urging it to be, take greater account of rural areas, but also how to do a better job of community engagement. And that's engagement with the full spectrum, from everything from the existing pedestrian and cycle users, the would-be cycle and pedestrian users, the people who just want to be able to get with their front door and be reassured that the low traffic neighbourhood scheme isn't going to stop them doing that. And at the far end of the spectrum, the people who are just never going to accept that 10 to 15% minority. How local authorities deal with that needs to be better spelled out in the LSWIP process. And by writing more formally into the LSWIP guidance that you as local cycling and walking advocates have a stronger role to play, I hope we are strengthening your hand in enabling you to say to the local authorities what a good, to advise your local authority on what a good LSWIP looks like. So hopefully that will kind of just strengthen the dialogue within the LSWIP process in the future. Final thing is to say is we support a local campaigner network called the Cycle Advocates Network. It's effectively what used to be the Right to Ride network, but the Right to Ride name was old hat, and frankly, there were all sorts of things wrong with Right to Ride. My colleague Stephen Dominey is now basically supporting that local campaigner network. He's a fantastic hive mind, and it enables people who join the network to tap into the experience of other local cycle campaigners around the country and feed into what am I doing. If I, the more that I and Duncan Dollimore, my counterpart doing campaigns, the more we know about what's going on around the country, and by the country I mean the whole of the UK, the more we know, the better it can shape our national lobbying if it's reflecting the issues that are coming up from the grassroots. So do get stuck in if you're not already part. If you're outside London, if you're not already part of it, do get stuck in. Well, you can get stuck in if you're in London. You can double within the LCC. I certainly have no wish to be poaching people from the London Cycling Campaign. I'm an LCC member myself. We have a very good working relationship with the LCC. We do have volunteers who are members of both, but I certainly wouldn't want to be poaching. If you're outside London, definitely do get stuck in. It's an excellent information sharing resource, and by getting stuck in, you make it even stronger. Okay, that's me.
Brilliant. Thanks, chaps. Oh, do you want to come back in, Simon? Sorry, go on.
No, just to say we've got some people with hands up and stuff. That's all. But over to you, Brian.
Oh yeah, you're going to start sharing as well for me now, are you, Simon? I know, good, yeah. No, well, yeah, I've got a few things to say, but I'm going to hold back because there's people who've been super patient. Ruth, what have you got for us?
Yes, where to start? So many of the councils, Hounslow in particular, the head of transport left, several of the officers left. They were all thrown all this new stuff very, very, very quickly. They had to deliver plans very, very, very quickly. I know from my sister in Harrogate, it was the same in Harrogate. The teams left, or they were reorganised, or whatever. Not every borough has a cycling champion or a cycling officer. It all seems very random, and it depends on what staff you've got and who you've got. The whole thing about funding that was earlier in the discussion, really it's not fair on officers, because they get thrown this stuff, they've got to agree it, they've got to plan it, they've got to deliver it really, really quickly, and then they make mistakes and their errors, and they get picked up on those, which is not fair for them. I think they've got a really hard job. I'm not a professional, as you all know. I'm a campaigner, and I do know most of my councillors, and I know them socially. We have a real problem that one or two are members of the LCC, and the anti-cycling councillors think that that should be FOI'd and they shouldn't be allowed to comment on C9, but they refuse to say whether they're members of the RAC or the AA. So Adam Tranter's piece was very interesting about that. So it is very hard, and it's very hard to keep being told to be nice to them, to be it's very hard to get to know your officers as a non-professional. So I know all my councillors. It's very hard to get through to the officers, because we also know we mustn't bother them with a lot of letters, because they're getting endless emails, especially a lot of anti-emails. And it's very, very hard for them to sort of read from the chat. So I'm lucky I've got WhatsApp numbers, but that is hard. And, my thing is, it shouldn't be dependent on how good campaigners are in a borough, council, county, whatever. This should be, thanks, Simon, you don't have to glower at me. This should be mandatory if we're having active travel in the country. then every council and every borough should have the same status, regardless of how good people campaign for it. It shouldn't be dependent on people like me, people who do work very hard to be campaigning for it. It should be top down, like it is in the Netherlands, and they should just say, well, okay, you vote against it, but we're going to do it because it's for the greater good. Thank you. That isn't my last word. I've got a good last word there.
So if I can come back on that and mainly say I wasn't glowering, I don't, maybe I was just slightly tired rather than glowering. So that was genuinely not a glower. What I was also going to say was I'm a pragmatist as a campaigner. Life isn't fair. We should be like Holland. We should in every way possibly. We should be like Holland, but we are not. So we have to play with what we have today, right here, right now in front of us. If we want change, we have to grab it. You're quite right about it, pretty much everything you said there, Ruth, but that is where we are today. So if you have a council that is weak, try and find a way to make it strong. If you have officers that have left, try and find resources. If you have campaigners that are weak, find other campaigners. It's just life at the moment.
Okay, very quickly, we've invited our new head of transport to meet Hounslow Cycling because we are the biggest stakeholders for cycling. He thinks it's too political just at the moment for him to come. This is ridiculous. It's about active travel. He should be coming. Sorry.
All right, Mark.
Thanks. I think Simon actually did mention one issue about officers, councils that change a lot, and it's down to the officers. And that's certainly the situation here in Brighton, where things happen and you get even councillors, I hope there are none here, and this isn't quoting, but where councillors say, I don't really quite know what's going on, things haven't turned out as I wanted them to turn out, and I don't understand why. And I won't make any details. But what does happen is in the home councils where you can't, like Brighton and Hove, where you can't make a decision because you need two parties. It is, as Simon also said, we have to live with the world we're in. And when you get home authorities, you have more than one party coming into play. And in Brighton, any two parties, we've got Labour, Green and Tory, any two parties can outvote the other party. So in other words, a party has the casting vote. And what's happened here, you might have seen, is that Labour's decided to come down on the side of shouty, loud motorists, won't talk to Labour cycles, won't listen to Labour cycles who want to contact them. And I've publicly said what they're going to do before the meeting that's going to be held. So it doesn't really matter sort of almost what we lobby and what we do with them. They've decided their position. They've listened to the Argus, in our case, local paper, and said what they're going to do. What's actually happening is the meeting that's going to be held next week, and we'll only have 3 councillors because of COVID. They reduced it, boiled it down to literally 1 councillor from each party who will vote because they're going to be whipped anyway. So they've decided what they're going to be vote, and a 2, 3, 4 hour meeting actually really makes no difference because they're going to rubber stamp the decisions that they've made in advance. So the problem is what happens before rather than at those meetings. And some councils have just got, have made up their mind from the media, and it's really difficult to know what to do in our situation when all the things, we've got a very good campaign group, we know how the council works, and we still can't manage to persuade a minority group of a minority group of councillors. End of rant.
That was a good rant, Mark, as ever. I just wanted to say one thing before I let the chaps jump back in, and just because it's come up a few times, and that's like the new LC whip guidance now. I'm not sure what they're going to put in, but I like to think we've given several ideas over the past year and a bit on ideas with beers. Talk through like the LTN planning and the whole network approach we did in Manchester, and it was all about doing that the kind of local network stuff. I remember when I was talking about the LC whip stuff in Manchester, I said, look, that's going to give you a list of all the currently hardest things to do. So great, we've got that. Bank it, that's your kind of super highways, if you will. So you still got to do your local network. Where would you put a crossing so that people in that estate can get to that school there? How do you get all that planned? And we even did a session where I did one live in Wellingborough. So I'm hoping that the new LC whip will cover the whole low traffic neighbourhood network planning and how they all fit together. That's my ask for them. I'm just shouting out to the people here, hoping that that it happens. But yeah. Back to the chaps to round off, and then I'll go to Ruth, the last word. Anything more you want to say, Simon and Roger?
Yeah, I'm happy to just jump back on Mark's point. I mean, it's a classic, you know, political divisions. This is about, in this case, this is about the fact that you know, the pattern of voting in Brighton is greener and greener. So the idea that the Labour councillors should be listening to drivers in this case is bonkers. So this is for Labour voters and Labour activists in the Labour Party to be turning round to their Labour councillors going, are you absolutely mad? Because you are handing votes straight to the Greens on this one. You know, that's surely the way forward with this. It's a party political issue, and it will be internal politics in the Labour Party that will decide this particular stance. But long term, Brighton Labour, you know, doing this is not going to play well for Brighton Labour, surely. I mean, it's very obvious that it isn't.
All right, Mark's nodding. I'll leave it there. Yeah, we're getting deep.
One thing to say, Brian, just say strong rumours that the transport decarbonisation plan is coming out tomorrow. I'm not expecting it to be full of excitements, but I think that there will be a few opportunities to just sort of keep pressing the idea that the transport funding overall needs to be rebalanced. Yeah, let's just see where that one goes. Just a little heads up that something is happening probably tomorrow, if the government have in fact signed it off. The Financial Times were saying that even this morning that the transport ministers hadn't actually signed it off yet. It's clearly been there have been all sorts of arguments behind the scenes, and we're going to have to wait and see what it actually says tomorrow. But fingers crossed, it'll at least give us some opportunities to push on.
Brilliant. Yeah, there's a last second bombshell. Nice one. We'll definitely cover that in a bit of detail. I'll give it a proper reading, and I'm sure you will as well, and most of the people here will. Okay, we'll go over to Ruth for last word then, and then we'll all wait for midnight to read the decarbonisation plan. Will we save the planet? Will we not? We'll find out tonight. Ruth, over to you.
Well,
thank you. And well, in half an hour, Hounslow Council are having their overview and scrutiny meeting about C9, and all the Labour councillors who are on the committee will be for it. There are 2 Tories who are against it. And I did put in the chat, it shouldn't be a political football. You know, active travel should be non-party political, and it should be across the board. But anyway, so the reason for my title today, and Graham, I am sorry I didn't put it out to you earlier. So we cycled to Oxford on Friday, last Friday, from Chiswick, and it was a lovely ride up over the Chilterns, absolutely fantastic. And then we come in and we see a sign which says Oxford Cycling City, partnered with Leiden. Well, Leiden, I don't know if any of you have been there, but it's a beautiful city in the north of Holland, and it is a university city, which is probably the partnership. But as in being a cycling city, I don't understand it. So we were on green painted lanes all the way down the Cowley Road and in towards Oxford proper, very little space to cycle in. And then when we got into the allegedly car-free bits, it was full of buses, vans, motorbikes, mopeds. And we were trying to find a wonderful, I can highly recommend the White Rabbit in Oxford pizza place. So, you know, even in this country, when we have something that says cycling city, it is light years from what a cycling city really should be. And I am sorry to be negative, but we had a great ride and I highly recommend it. And that's my last word.